I thought of continuing from where we were yesterday morning in the same chapter, Canto 11, Chapter 2, Text 33, 11 to 33, is a text where this topic about fear starts. And it's spoken by a great sage, one of the sages speaking to Maharaj Nimi. And I happen to have it in my computer. Sri Kavi. Yeah. So 11 to 33, we'll chant responsively. Shri Kaviruvacha Manye Kutashid Bhayam Achyutasya Padambujo Pasanam Atra Nityam Udvigna Buddhir Asad Atma Bhavad Vishvatmana Yatra Nivartate Bihi Manye Kutaschid Bhayam Achyutasya Padambujo Pasanam Atra Nityam Udvigna Buddhir Asad Atma Bhavad Vishvatmana Yatra Nivartate Bihi Shri Kabir Uvacha Manye Kutaschid Bhayam Achyutasya Padambujo Pasanam Atra Nityam Udvigna Buddhir Asad Atma Bhavad Vishvatmana Yatra Nivartate Bihi
Shri Kabir Uvacha Manye Kutaschid Bhayam Achyutasya Padambujo Pasanam Atra Nityam Udvigna Buddhir Asad Atma Bhavad Vishvatmana Yatra Nivartate Bihi
Ladies.
Shri Kaviruvacha Manye Kutaschid Bhayam Achyutasya Padambujo Pasanam Atra Nityam Udvigna Buddhir Asad Atma Bhavad Vishvatmana Yatra Nivartate Bihi
Madan Mohan, let's give it a try.
Shri Kaviruvacha
Manye Kutaschid Bhayam Achyutasya
Padambujo Pasanam Atra Nityam Udvigna Buddhir Asad Bhavad Vishvatmana Yatra Nivartate Bihi.
I have in front of me, not the word for word, but it's a PDF, and with the translation and commentary by Vishwanath. So I'm going to read the translation and commentary of the BBT, and then we'll move on to Vishwanath and discuss. Sri Kavi said, I consider that one whose intelligence is constantly disturbed by his falsely identifying himself with the temporary material world can achieve real freedom from fear only by worshiping the lotus feet of the infallible Supreme Lord. In such devotional service, all fear ceases entirely. Report. In the opinion of Srila Sridhar Swami, the word asat atma bhavad in this verse indicates that the living entity is constantly disturbed by fear because he identifies his eternal self with the temporary material body and its paraphernalia. Similarly, and we'll hear what he actually says, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has stated, Bhakti pratikula deha geha dvishu asaktim. Because of one's attachment to one's temporary body and so-called home, family, friends, and so on, one's intelligence is always disturbed by fear, and one is unable to appreciate or practice pure devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So-called religious activities executed in the bodily conception of life are always accompanied by fear and anxiety about the ultimate result. But pure devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead frees one from fear and anxiety because it is executed on the platform of Vaikuntha, or the spiritual plane, where there is no fear or anxiety. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, the process of bhakti yoga is so powerful that even in the stage of sadhana bhakti, in which one is practicing devotional service through rules and regulations, the neophyte can have a direct experience of fearlessness by the mercy of the Lord. As one's devotional service becomes mature, the Lord reveals himself to the devotee, and all fear is totally vanquished forever. Paragraph. Every living entity has a natural propensity to serve God, but because of false identification with the temporary body, one loses touch with this pure constitutional propensity and instead inauspiciously becomes attached to temporary sense gratification in the form of body, home, family, and so on. The result of such attachment is continuing distress, which can be eradicated only by devotional service to the Supreme Lord. Paragraph. In this connection, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur has quoted the following verse from Canto 3, Chapter 9. O my Lord, the people of the world are embarrassed by material anxieties. They are always afraid. They always try to protect wealth, body, and friends. They are filled with lamentation and unlawful desires and paraphernalia, and they avariciously base their undertakings on the perishable conception of I and mine. As long as they do not take shelter of your safe lotus feet, they are full of such anxieties. And here's Vishwanath's translation and purport, which is quite short. Kavi said, for one whose intelligence is disturbed by his falsely identifying himself with the temporary material world, I consider that worship of the Lord's lotus feet, which produces fearlessness from the material world, is the highest goal, because Paramatma destroys all fear by that worship. And his commentary. O King, I see that all dharmas have an element of fear, but bhakti gives fearlessness. I consider the highest goal to be bhakti, from which there is no fear from time, karma, or other obstacles. The chief qualification is mentioned. A person is disturbed by his atma, by his thoughts. a body and family, asat, which are difficult to give up. This means he must desire to give up attachment to body, house, and other objects, unfavorable for bhakti. When one performs that worship, fear is destroyed by the Paramatma. Interesting, huh? The Paramatma conception is subordinate to the Bhagavan conception, but the Paramatma feature specifically deals with Prakriti. And there's this chain reaction or cause and effect situation where, since fear is the focal point, and fearlessness is converse. Where does fear arise from? Where does everything arise from? From the source of everything. And Paramatma has the function of dealing with Prakriti. So fear is an element of Prakriti. Paramatma has jurisdiction over Prakriti. So Paramatma can give fear or can give fearlessness. Can withdraw fear, withdraw the influence of Prakriti. Or that is to say, Maya adhyakshena Prakriti suyate sacharacharam. I must have said something right. Maya adhyaksha means oversee or supervise. Adhyaksha. Maya adhyaksha prakriti. So Paramatma gives or pulls away the influence of Prakriti, covering the Paraprakriti, the living entity. If one wants fearlessness, then is question. Is the term bhakti appropriate or applicable for the Paramatma feature as much as it is for the Bhagavan feature? Or is bhakti only applicable to the Paramatma, to the Bhagavan feature, and is not applicable to the Paramatma feature? Who would like to volunteer? A or B? Both. That's your answer? Can you explain? You want to know the two options, A and B? Bhakti applies to both the Paramatma and Bhagavan feature. Or B, the term bhakti only applies to the Bhagavan feature because serving a person is where service is reposed, and that's the Bhagavan feature. So it only applies to the Bhagavan feature. A. Could you explain why A?
Because Paramatma is Krishna too, so it's not separate Krishna.
That's okay. I like your answer. And I'll explain why I like your answer. There are those that don't see, and there are those like you that do see. For example, in the Sankhya philosophy section of the Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Kapila Dev, teaching Sankhya philosophy. It starts with, chapter 25 is where the whole discussion begins, but Sankhya philosophy specifically is dealing with Prakriti, the 24 elements, Then apart from the 24 elements is the soul. And here's the divisions of the 24 elements. And here's how they fit together, the puzzle pieces. And then over there is the soul. And then the way chapter 26 ends is, and once that distinction is very clear, one should meditate on Paramatma. The realm of spirit is resting upon Paramatma. And then in that meditation upon Paramatma, one should engage in full devotional service, which is exactly what you said. But because that's Kapila Dev, Kapila Dev may be teaching Sankhya, but he's teaching Bhakti. He's an incarnation of the Supreme Lord. He's not simply teaching about the material elements. The impersonalists, they like Sankhya, minus even Paramatma and Bhagavan. They just like 24 elements. They like. It's very complicated, and they, a little proud of how they understand the 24 elements and how the puzzle pieces fit together. Like somebody that's mastered how to work a, what do you call those little rubric? Yeah. So you can, in 3 minutes you get all the colors matched up. Look at this. Now mix them up, and here 3 minutes all the colors match up. Look at this. And no one else can do it, but there's some person that's mastered how to make the rubric thing match up. Something like that is the Gyanis that like to see, here's all the puzzle pieces fit together, and here's how life comes from, as scientists at least, how life comes from matter. All the puzzle pieces fit together. Look at this. Prove me wrong. And you people just don't understand because you're not smart enough to understand how everything comes from matter, and all there is matter. So they're not interested in Paramatma. The yogis, they're interested in Paramatma, but devotee, like Lord Kapila, he's interested in understanding matter, understanding spirit, understanding the controller both, who is Paramatma, and then ultimately Bhagavan. So you move from philosophy to comprehending puzzle pieces, to the controller of the puzzle pieces, to the Supreme Person. So if you're a follower of Lord Kapila Dev, Bhakti applies to both Paramatma and Bhagavan. And if you're not a follower of Kapila Dev, or they're not hearing from a devotee, then the term doesn't apply. Because it applies to Bhagavan. And if it doesn't lead to Bhagavan, then it doesn't apply. Because how can you render service to Paramatma? The yogi isn't rendering service to Paramatma. He's meditating on Paramatma. But if he gets the association of devotee, he may, in his meditation, want to do service to Paramatma. Or then the Bhagavan feature becomes manifest in his heart, not just the Paramatma feature. Something like Dhruva. Something like Dhruva. He was seeing the Paramatma feature, and then poof, he disappeared, and then there he is in front of him. Because his guru was Narada, and his mother was obviously a great devotee. And Swayambhuva Manu was, so her father-in-law. So, he's a great devotee. So Dhruva was in a bhakti mood, although he was meditating on Supersoul, or meditating on Vishnu, who is the controller of Prakriti. So back to the verse. Only one who's engaged in bhakti can take, Paramatma takes away fearlessness. That's the Vishwanath's rendering. Now, in the BBT purport, they don't go there. Vishwanath goes there. We can say Krishna removes fear and gives fearlessness. I mean, that's because we just finished this whole thing with Ramayana. Ram gives fearlessness. For one who takes shelter of me, even once, sincerely says, I am yours, Sharanagati, I am yours, I grant fearlessness. And so where does fear arise from? You can say fear arises from Supersoul because he gives fear. So it arises from him, and he can withdraw it. But why does he give it? Because one has turned one's attention away foolishly. And when you turn your attention away, what do you see? Darkness. Turn attention away from light, you see darkness. You see Maya. Darkness. So Supersoul covers the living entity with Maya. Supersoul removes Maya. Then what to speak of, as the BBT purport says, when the Lord personally appears. Now these are Navayogendras, right? The speakers. Sri Kavi is one of the Navayogendras. And our acharyas describe that there are two classic personalities who represent or are situated in Shantarasa. You ready? Navayogendras. Because those in Shantarasa are not moved to service. There's on veneration of Bhagavan. And they may very well, they do understand Sankhya philosophy and everything's resting on Bhagavan, including the Paramatma's controlling Prakriti. It's resting on Bhagavan. But they're not engaged, their mood is Shanta. That doesn't mean because their mood is not Dasya, they don't understand it. Just like, for example, just like Shukadev Goswami, or Lord Brahma, or Akrura, or others that understand the exalted nature of the residents in Vrindavan, and even specifically the exalted nature of the gopis, they're not gopis. They understand it. They understand it by dint of their pure devotion. Now, all of this it's like interesting. Practically, how does this apply to all of us? Strive to become, say it negatively, who wants to be fearful? That's a negative emotion, like we were discussing. We don't like it. You don't like not liking it either. It's like that's another negative emotion. But so, what's the positive emotion? The positive emotion is devotional service to the personality of Godhead, and then we can say Krishna removes fear and gives fearlessness. We can say Paramatma removes fear and gives fearlessness. But the instrument that prompts Krishna to prompt Paramatma to remove fear, that feature of Maya, because it's a Maya feature, is devotional service, and there isn't another option. So, broaden the application point. Broaden how to deal with negative emotions. Do you know anybody that has negative emotions sometimes? You've never met anybody that has some negative emotions? So what do you advise them? Hey, Prabhu, just, become a pure devotee and you won't have any negative emotions. Thanks a lot, Prabhu. Now I got my real life to deal with. There's this situation and I'm feeling these negative emotions. So it's that same discussion as yesterday. We deal in practical ways with the circumstance that's causing the negative emotion and the negative emotion. We, manage our negative emotions, manage our fear and anxiety and stress, and go further on the path of bhakti because it leads to the place of no negative emotions. So we deal with the prakriti and we direct our attention towards devotion, our service. We take shelter in that place of service. And it's not closing your eyes or sticking your head in the sand, those phrases. It's reality. And as opposed to illusion. So what to do about the illusory feature that looks like it's the rock that hit you and the negative emotion that you're feeling because the rock hit you. And it hurts. So you deal with that in practical, sensible, appropriate ways. And you continue to strive towards, and don't forget, continue to strive towards full shelter of your service, your constitutional position as a servant. That is, Krishna is to be pleased. This is transcendental knowledge. And a life of transcendental knowledge is a life of devotion to Krishna, where we hear transcendental knowledge from Krishna in Bhagavad Gita and about Krishna in the Bhagavatam, and from the right sources, persons that know Krishna or that understand the process of bhakti. And we hear from those people. Because that sound has the potential, has the potency to stir our deeper devotional sentiments and eradicate the darkness of Maya. No, it's Paramatma that removes the negative emotion or the fear, but it's the medium. There's the sadhana, there's the sadhya. You can say fearlessness is the goal. But fearlessness as the goal means connecting with the personality of Godhead in our constitutional position. That's the goal. Bhakti is the goal. It's the means and the goal. Being connected to Krishna is the goal. And the byproduct of that is specific to this little section is fearlessness. And then you can expand it to other illusory conceptions and illusory emotions connected to those illusory conceptions. Maya is tricky, and Maya is not nice. Maya hurts. But that hurt is an illusory hurt. Now, one other thing, and that is there such a thing? The answer to this question is yes. Is there such a thing as transcendental fear? Yes. What's an example of transcendental fear? You have one?
Maybe like the coward boys that fear like Pentecostal stories. The coward boys get fear like we should go and pluck the fruits or not.
Exactly. Very good. Here's another one. When the cowherd boys and Balaram saw Krishna in the mouth of Bakasura, they fainted. That was a negative emotion, big time. Now, how did that happen? Because Balaram isn't just a cowherd boy. He's omniscient. He knows who Krishna is. He knows that Krishna is all-powerful. But his affection was so strong that to give Balaram that intensified feeling, Yogamaya covered him so he would forget Krishna's all-powerful capacity and his omniscience, and he would feel that feeling. Anxiety and fear, and so strong, he fainted. That's transcendental. Similarly, we have this, definition by negation conception that Vaikuntha means no anxiety. Question: is there anxiety? Does Mother Yasoda feel anxiety? Krishna ate dirt, or etc., etc., etc. Transcendental parenthood means you buy into anxiety. It's part of the territory. And, our challenge is to take out the material portion and leave the spiritual portion, which is what Queen Kunti's prayer is saying. Please take away the material portion, leave the spiritual portion of my attachments. Easier said than done. But how is that going to happen? Paramatma can take it away. Why would he take it away? Because we want him to take it away. Not just we want to be happy, but we want only the proper mode of service. And then there's transcendental anxiety. Now, we're not about to say that Queen Kunti she's a mixed devotee. She's speaking in that way. She's not a mixed devotee. She's a pure devotee. But she's speaking in that way. And pure devotees will sometimes do that for various reasons. Transcendental understanding requires accepting that we can't understand things through the lens of material evaluation. We can't use material yardsticks to measure transcendence. Like these discussions that we've been having about nonviolent communication. Like, why did Ram speak to Lakshman that way? That's violent. He must have known. He was already feeling terrible. Why did he rub it in? What good would that accomplish? He's just making him feel crummy. He's already feeling crummy. And he's not going to find Sita, so, why did he do that? Or the other question, to relish transcendence with a proper understanding of what it is. If we can properly understand that, no more birth and death. We're in transcendence, which means we haven't properly understood it. We can relish it, but we have some distance to go, some further purification to go. And even if we don't understand, still it's beneficial to hear and then inquire and serve and look up to those perfected souls that have that understanding and have that appreciation. I'll end with this, just on the transcendental emotion thing. Raghunath Das Goswami, Rupa Goswami wrote many books, and he would engage others to evaluate his books. Sanatana Goswami sometimes Jiva Goswami, sometimes Raghunath Das Goswami. Specifically with Sanatana Goswami, it was like find where you find faults. For Jiva Goswami, it was proofreading, and Raghunath Das Goswami was because he's the Prayojana Guru. You know, how does it strike you? So it's described that Rupa Goswami gave a copy of Lalita Madhava to Raghunath Das Goswami, and it was destroying him because he was feeling the emotion of Krishna leaving Vrindavan in a manner that Rupa Goswami was describing it. It was devastating, and so his whole existence was deteriorating. So therefore, Rupa Goswami wrote a happy book. It was Danakeli Chintamani. That's a tax pastime with lots of laughter. And he said, I want to do some writing, some editing on this book. Please give it back to me. But you can read this one. And he liked it. And he became happy. And he became so happy that he wrote his own, description of the similar description, but in a different manner, in a different mood. He just became absorbed. So, transcendental emotion. Nothing to do with material. Nothing to do with material. But, this emotion, that emotion on the spiritual plane. So those who are, back to the verse, this fearlessness is a negation of the material. It's not a negation of the spiritual. So let's see if there's some discussion. Krishna Priya.
Guru Maharaj, very grateful for these classes on fear, giving me a lot of clarity. I have two questions. The first question is, there is freedom from fear, and then there is fearlessness. And towards the end, you clarified that fearlessness is negating the material aspect of it.
Yes.
So my question is, I understand that definition of fear, but from the affective point of view, my understanding is that fear is very primordial, it's very instinctual. So far as we have a material body, we are bound to experience fear.
Yes.
So I understand freedom from fear. So in the translation, word to word, freedom from fear is mentioned. But Prabhupada often uses the language fearlessness.
Yes.
So how does, let's say, living in this material world, how can we tangibly, or when do we know that we are experiencing fearlessness?
It has everything to do with how your consciousness is fixed on Krishna or not. That's the litmus test. If attention goes away from Krishna, because that's in the verse we discussed yesterday, Ishada petasya viparyoyo smritihi. Forget. You forget yourself, you forget your relationship with Krishna, you forget Krishna. That's the material. And transcendental is Krishna's in the center, and Krishna's in the center, and Krishna's in the center. And I was thinking a little bit that question yesterday, the Murli Vadika's question, he may be listening. The question about, one shouldn't lament and one may lament. Same. It's instinctual. You don't stop instinct. You Krishnaize it. Grief is a natural feeling. And it's not like somebody's in Maya if they're feeling grief. They're numb if they're not feeling grief. That's like, they become a stone. That's not wanted. So your second question.
Yes. So this the A-B question that you asked, whether bhakti is serving Paramatma or the Bhagavan feature. So at least personally, for in my own journey in Krishna consciousness, one of the strengths that I've identified is acting from the heart or acting from the inspiration platform, whether it is my daily life or work or the interest that I pursue. So but you clarified that a follower of Lord Kapila would consider it as both. So
Yes.
my answer was both.
Yes.
Because 24 hours a day, but majority of the time, I feel fortunate to feel that connection with Paramatma. Like I pray, and then like when I have to take a decision at work or something, I pray, and then like more than praying to a deity form. So I'm just wondering, what would be your advice there? Because I know a Krishna conscious goal is the Bhagavan feature, but I feel more connected to the super soul inspiration.
Fine. That's my response is. I would suggest what you're doing fits completely with what the Srimad Bhagavatam teachings say, and it's like Canto 2, Chapter 2 is followed by Canto 2, Chapter 3. Pure devotional service, change in heart. And that's a nice topic. And such a nice topic, I plan to speak on it during the Vyasa Puja weekend, the transformation of heart topic. And so let it happen naturally. And that's something to aspire for. Then you don't have to feel uncomfortable because you haven't, there hasn't been transformation of heart yet. But it's a stage where it happens naturally, and one should aspire for it. Let's take, for example, the residents of Vrindavan. I don't get a sense that they're praying to Paramatma. No, Krishna is their friend, or their beloved, or their little independent, and they're attached on that platform. They don't need, Dhyan Yoga, Gyan Yoga. Krishna said to the gopis, "We don't want Dhyan Yoga, we want you." So it's a stage, and then it's a stage that comes. According to Rupa Goswami's teachings, it comes as bhakti matures, as we're following. It doesn't happen automatically. It happens by spontaneous growth of the bhakti principle, and change of heart. Now this is it's a high topic, but it absolutely fantastic, just as you described. Just keep, because it's natural and it works. Your thought is with Krishna as opposed to just turning the Krishna channel off and going over here and thinking about what's the best decision here. And then later on, I forgot, I turned the Krishna channel off. But if you stay with the Krishna channel on, then fantastic. You're very fortunate. And then stay with the bhakti process that, in natural sequence and due course of time, the rising of the sun becomes more brilliant.
Sorry, Guru Maharaj.
Oh, your son has something here.
Hey Krishna Maharaj, I was wondering yesterday's Ramayana class. I have a question on it. So,
Okay, go ahead.
as you mentioned yesterday, you said Ayodhya is near Lanka or Lucknow, right?
Yeah.
So how do you get from Lucknow to like Lanka, and if it's so far away?
It's not so far away. When I'm not sure what your question is, but when we did a yatra, right?
Yeah.
And we stayed in Lucknow in a kind of nice hotel, and the owner was very kind and made a very modest price compared to what he would normally charge because we were Vaishnavas. And so they got in buses and went to Ayodhya. Not so far away.
No, I'm talking from Ayodhya to Lanka. Because the first one
Yeah,
is
we went from Ayodhya to Lanka. Oh, excuse me. Did I say Lanka?
Yeah.
Oh. From Lucknow to
Sri Lanka. It's talking about Sri Lanka.
Where Ravan is.
His question is, how did they get from Ayodhya area to Lanka when they had to go?
how did who go? How to do that?
like Ravana. How did he always like go back to?
Oh, he's got high speed travel system. He's a Rakshasa. He can go all over the place. He's got powers that most, fellows like you and me don't have. He could travel with his Pushpaka Vimana. Now I understand your question. He could travel with his Pushpaka Vimana, or he sometimes didn't even need it. When he went to kidnap Sita, he had a chariot, and Jatayu smashed the chariot. So how did he get back? He didn't even need a chariot. He zoom, zoom, zoom. Off he goes, flying through the space. He had powers. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Maharaj, when we talk about being a servant, two things come to my mind. One is being in service in consciousness and being in service in action. Like this, the consciousness aspect and the action aspect. So I observe many times when the service is done, those two things may not be aligned. Either one is just thinking of serving Krishna but not really taking action, or some grades of in between where there's a lot of action, lot of active physical service, but the consciousness isn't really in the right place. So would you like to share how those two things can be more aligned for a wholesome service than like a choppy one?
Abhyasa. You get your compass out and make sure you're headed in the right direction on a regular basis. The alignment adjustment. And one of the best ways of doing that on a regular basis is while chanting the holy name. Make sure, because we chant every day and we're at least attempting to become conscious while we're chanting every day. Attempting. And if you're not attempting, then you're not aligned. And if you are attempting, then there's great strength just from that very core activity. It's the most important way to practice alignment, and by practice it becomes the way that we live our life. And then it spills over or carries over, or concentric geometric circles go over to what we do in the course of the day. It's not automatic, but it's natural. So my answer is perform japa, and with that practice, the alignment practice. As the mouth is going, where's consciousness?
Is there still some I'm thinking of some of my devotee friends. So is there any, a lot of advantage in doing physical expression of service, even though the consciousness may not be that strong. Just
Well,
somebody.
it's the same question being asked in a different way, as far as I can see. Is it a different question, or the same question? In a
Suppose
different way?
somebody is not at that stage of being aligning their
But
consciousness.
that's most of us. It's most of everybody. For someone to come to that stage, it takes a little light to go on that says, and then how do I get alignment? That's another and then to practice it. That's another one. So there's layers, and when we have friends or those we're acquainted with that are not so aligned, and we perceive it, then comes, well, what do we do? You be a friend. You be respectful and kind, and according to the personality and the circumstance, etc. You try to remind them of Krishna, and remind them of how to be Krishna connected. It's, and so on. And it acknowledge that it's a gradual process. It takes a great soul to do that, to have a friend and just be a friend, and just be become a better friend if you become more pure, because purity is the force. You can then be a better friend. You'll become more effective at helping them be mindful of the alignment principle, and helping them, when they become not aligned, to become realigned. We covered this a whole bunch during the Ramayana discussion. There are many. How can somebody who goes way up there get distracted? There's the Indra topic, and there's even Ram and Lakshman topic, or Sugriva topic, or any a friend. They have some understandings, and they don't operate according to those understandings. And a sign of one is elevated is not that they never get distracted, but as soon as there's a reminder, they're back on track. They're not protesting, why you buzz off. They're not like that. They're very, very appreciative of, appropriate reminder. That's an elevated receiver of good association. Then being an elevated giver of good association knows how to do it, appropriate to the person. And in many cases, where the giver is not so refined and the receiver is not so refined, and then there's misunderstanding between the giver and the receiver. And that's, goes back to Advaita Chandra's question yesterday. Why do people, go off on each other when they're really close? That's another answer to your question. The heart may be a little closed on both the giving and the receiving end. So, Vaishnavas, as Vaishnavas mature, they get on the other side of that. And until one gets on the other side of that, there's going to be telling situations in relationships. And then how do you navigate that territory? Depends on the relationship. And a lot depends upon one's own purity. So that's where the attention, first and foremost, goes. That's my responsibility. Become a pure devotee. And then I can be an instrument of Krishna better. It's easier said than done, but that's the answer.
May I ask another follow-up, Maharaj?
Sure.
So, Maharaj, I have observed that for people who are very new in Krishna consciousness, whether it's students or some other newcomers, they very easily say yes for doing a service, say a service project or something. But it's hard to say, okay, here are beads and start chanting one round from tomorrow. So I think we were following in the latter part earlier, but now I think our thought is shifting more towards creating services for them, and then comes the consciousness. So would that be a right?
Yeah, that's standard. I mean, everybody's different, but that's very common. Very common. Very common. So we give them some service. And in the course of service, there's a relationship.
Yes.
Because relationships, there's this ISKCON saying, relationships are suspended upon common service. Hung upon or suspended upon common service. So common service and some relationship. And then when there's some relationship, the kata goes to Krishna kata. And when there's Krishna kata and there's a an affectionate relationship, then there's further purification besides the service. And gradual. And there are persons I know whose whole approach is simply service. Engaging people in food for life or something like that. Because that's worldly people can relate to it and they like it. They feel a happiness. We're feeding people. Let's spend hours and hours and hours doing that thing. Give them a bead bag? No. Untitled Chapter.
So, Guru Maharaj, I may struggle to articulate this one because I think I'm thinking on different topics here. So, fear, parenting, and then Queen Kunti's comment around material portion, take away the material portion. So, one of the main fears for parents is, what is the destination of my children, right? That uncertainty around that. But I wonder if sometimes, we forget that we have different facilities and resources as devotees versus, say, maybe our ancestors who are pious but did not necessarily have all the Krishna conscious, blessings of the acharyas and the resources that come with it. So I wonder, are we carrying some of the fear that they had about their own children, and of course that's us. And to me, it seems like maybe we are not right-sizing the problem, given that we are in a different, very different environment today. But at the same time, there's also strength in what the ancestors did and how they brought us up, the values that they instilled and so on and so forth. So I'm just not clear what does this taking away material portion means, and how do I do this with the ancestors in the picture? How does it work?
You got to ask Krishna Leela that question. I don't know. I mean, that's her thing. That's one of her things, and you've learned it from her. And the basic principle, as far as I understand it, is just acknowledge, and feel, and express the feeling of gratitude. And that's an affective response. It's not an intellectual response. Exactly. Listening to your question, I was thinking, from the Western perspective, how degraded Christianity has become. And Prabhupada would speak about it sometimes. It's rampant is meat eating and cruelty to animals. And in conversations with persons that are from that tradition, they don't, not everybody, of course, but many, it just doesn't penetrate. It's lost. And being here in Connecticut, just even seeing the names of everything, it's all England. It's New England. It's England. New Avon. And it's just borrowing the names of streets, the names of the cities, the names of everything. So those people didn't come vegetarian either. So but fast forward, and it's in your face. So much in your face, you just become numb to it. It's everywhere. And who's going to question the everywhere? Anyway. It's that just that's where my thoughts went to with what the values that our forefathers gave us. Whew. And then at least for those that are settlers in America that became Christian, where'd that come from? The Europeans. Where'd the Europeans get their values from? The kings that were driven out of India by Parshuram. Prabhupada speaks like that, the Aryan population and so forth. Indo-Aryan stock, traced to Parshuram. Anyway, how to deal with it was your question. And we appreciate those who have ancestor-wise, either our immediate blood family or the communities from which we have come. The larger. So whether the basis is favorable or unfavorable, the good news is the Bhakti principle can bring transcendence. That's where we take shelter. While we're dealing with the same topic as this larger topic. And like your wife's question yesterday, of knowing where our anarthas are, because it helps us get to where we want to go. Because we don't pay where our anarthas are, and then we can just make a mess of things. I like that example of, the bags of leaves that weren't properly. That was a good example. I thought the same thing when we saw it. There's people just living their lives. It was, probably a good idea to, anyway. In where the central New Jersey temple is, people just rake their lawn and put the leaves in a pile on the side, on the curb. And they leave it there, and the city doesn't come pick them up, and it just blocks a parking space. And people have a hassle because of the parking space. And some people put them in bags on the curbside. That makes it easier. They're not on the street, but on, between the sidewalk and the curb. So here's a fellow that had who was a good intention, creating danger with good intention. So we need to pay attention. So your question of the ancestor thing, there's value that comes with when ancestry had high values, but they didn't have the resources that we have. So we work with both. To put your leaves and fasten them and secure them properly. And dispose of them in a place that's, sensitive to Mother Earth, etc. Anyway, so we have to live our lives responsibly. And it's difficult because at the age of Kali, everything's disturbed. So I'm going to end. I'm going to end. It's